wedding guests looked up. The sound came first, a deep rhythmic thudding that drowned out the string quartet. Then they saw it, a helicopter, descending onto the manicured lawn of the country club like something out of a movie. The bride went pale. The groom's hand started shaking because the woman stepping out of that helicopter, holding 3 small children, was someone he thought he'd never see again. His ex-wife, and she wasn't supposed to be there. More importantly, she wasn't supposed to look like that, confident, powerful, untouchable. He had invited her to this wedding for one reason only, to remind her of everything she'd lost. But as she walked toward the ceremony in a designer dress that cost more than his car, carrying children he didn't know existed, everyone realized the same thing. This wasn't going to be the wedding anyone expected. This was something else entirely. To understand what happened that day in June, you need to know who these people were before everything fell apart. Her name was Claire Mitchell. His name was David Cross. They met in college, both working part-time jobs to pay tuition, both dreaming of something bigger than the small Michigan town they grew up in. They fell in love the way young people do, quickly, completely, without thinking about what comes after the romance fades. They got married at 23 in a courthouse ceremony with 2 witnesses and $20 worth of grocery store flowers. It wasn't fancy, but it was real. For the first 3 years, they were happy in a way that struggling couples can be happy. They shared a 1-bedroom apartment with thin walls and a leaky faucet. They ate pasta 4 nights a week. They talked about the future, like it was a promise they were both making. David was studying finance. Claire worked as a receptionist at a dental office, saving every extra dollar for the life they were building together. But somewhere around year 4, things started to change. David got an internship at a prestigious investment firm in downtown Detroit. Suddenly, he was around people who wore $1,000 suits and talk about vacation homes and private schools. He started staying late at the office, started mentioning how exhausting it was to come home to their cramped apartment, started looking at Claire differently, like she was a reminder of a life he wanted to leave behind. Claire noticed the distance before David ever said anything. It started with small things. He stopped asking about her day, stopped holding her hand when they walked together, stopped looking at her the way he used to, like she was the most important person in the room. One night, she made his favorite dinner, pot roast with carrots, potatoes, the meal his mother used to make. He barely touched it, just sat there scrolling through his phone, his face lit by the blue glow of the screen. She asked him what was wrong. He said nothing, but nothing felt like everything. Then came the comments. Little cuts disguised as observations. Why don't you ever dress up anymore? Do you really need that second helping? My boss's wife runs marathons. Claire tried to brush them off, tried to tell herself he was just stressed from work. But deep down she knew he was ashamed of her, ashamed of their life, ashamed of the fact that she still shopped at thrift stores and clipped coupons and drove a car with a dented bumper. His mother didn't help. Margaret Cross had never approved of the marriage. She made it clear at every family gathering that David could have done better, could have married someone from a better family, someone with connections and money and the right last name. And now that David was climbing the corporate ladder, Margaret's voice got louder. She started inviting eligible young women to family dinners, started talking about how important it was to have a partner who could keep up with success. Claire felt herself shrinking, not just physically, though she did lose weight from the stress, but emotionally, spiritually. She started to believe what they were saying about her, that she wasn't enough, that she was holding him back, that she was a problem. It happened on a Tuesday in March. Claire came home early from work because she'd been feeling sick all week, nauseous, exhausted, dizzy. She thought maybe she had the flu. She walked into the apartment and found David packing a suitcase, not for a business trip, for good. He didn't even look surprised to see her, just kept folding shirts, his movements calm and deliberate, like he'd been planning this for months. She asked him what he was doing. He said he was leaving, that he'd met someone else, someone who fit into his new life, someone who understood ambition and success and what it took to get ahead in this world. Her name was Victoria. She worked in marketing at his firm. She came from money, old money, the kind that opened doors and made things easy. Her father played golf with senators. Her mother sat on charity boards. She was everything Claire wasn't, and David was tired pretending that didn't matter. Claire felt the room spin. She grabbed the counter to steady herself. She asked him if there was any chance, any way they could work through this. He said no. He said he'd already signed a lease on a new apartment, already told his family, already made his choice. Then he said something that would stay with her for years. You were perfect for who I was, Claire, but I'm not that person anymore. He left that night, took his clothes, his laptop, his half of everything they'd built together, left her with a lease she couldn't afford, the furniture they bought at yard sales, and a marriage that was suddenly brutally over. She didn't cry that first night. She was too shocked, too numb. It wasn't until the next morning, when she woke up alone in their bed, that it hit her. And when it did, it felt like drowning. 2 weeks later, Claire realized she'd missed her period. At first, she thought it was stress. The divorce papers had arrived. David's lawyer was pushing for a quick settlement. She'd been barely eating, barely sleeping, surviving on coffee and crackers. But something told her to take a test anyway. She bought one at the drugstore on her way home from work, paid in cash like she was buying something shameful, took it in the bathroom of her apartment with her hands shaking so hard she almost dropped it. 2 lines. Positive. She was pregnant with David's child. The man who had just left her. The man who had made it clear he wanted nothing to do with the life they'd built together. She called him. He didn't answer. She called again, left a voicemail, said they needed to talk, that it was important. He texted back 3 hours later. Whatever it is, tell my lawyer. She felt something break inside her chest. This wasn't just a divorce anymore. This was abandonment. She tried one more time. Sent him a text that said, I'm pregnant. David, we need to talk about this. He called her that night, but not to congratulate her, not to ask how she was feeling. He asked her what she wanted, meaning money, meaning how much would it take for this problem to go away. She hung up on him, and in that moment, she made a decision. She would do this alone. She would have this baby, raise this child, build a life that had nothing to do with David Cross or his new world of expensive suits and country clubs. She would survive. She had to. But survival turned out to be harder than she thought. The stress of the divorce, the financial pressure, the emotional weight of everything, it was too much. She was working double shifts at the dental office, trying to save money for the baby, trying to figure out how she'd afford childcare and rent and diapers and everything else. One night, she felt a sharp pain in her lower abdomen. Then came the bleeding. She drove herself to the hospital, hands gripping the steering wheel so tight her knuckles turned white, whispering please, please, please like a prayer. But prayers don't always get answered the way you want. She lost the baby that night, 12 weeks along. The doctor said it was a miscarriage, likely caused by stress and exhaustion. Said it wasn't her fault, but it felt like her fault. It felt like her body had failed, like she'd failed, like everything she tried to hold on to had slipped through her fingers. She called David from the hospital, one last time, told him what happened. He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, maybe this is for the best. Claire, you weren't ready to be a mother anyway. She hung up, blocked his number, and decided right then that David Cross was dead to her. She left Michigan 3 weeks later. Didn't tell anyone where she was going. Just packed her car with whatever fit, left the apartment keys on the counter, and drove south until she ran out of highway. She ended up in Atlanta. No job, no plan, just a desperate need to be somewhere that didn't remind her of everything she'd lost. The first year in Atlanta was the hardest year of Claire's life. She slept in her car for 2 weeks before she found a room in a shared house with 3 other women, worked as a waitress at a diner, pulling double shifts and living on tips and leftover fries. She was lonely, exhausted, angry, but she was also something else. Determined. One of her roommates, a woman named Jackie, worked in real estate. She saw something in Claire, a resilience, a sharpness that hadn't been beaten out of her yet. Jackie started teaching her the business, how to read contracts, how to spot good investments. How to negotiate. Claire was a fast learner. Within 6 months, she got her real estate license. Within a year, she closed her first deal. It wasn't much, a small condo in a transitional neighborhood, but it was hers, her commission, her success, and it felt like breathing again. She started studying at night, took online courses in finance and business management, read every book she could find about building wealth from nothing. She worked harder than anyone else in her office, showed up earlier, stayed later, took the clients no one else wanted, and slowly, painfully, she started to climb. By year 2, she'd save enough to rent her own apartment. By year 3, she bought her first investment property. By year 4, she was managing a portfolio of rental units and flipping houses on the side. The money started coming in. Not a little, a lot. She reinvested everything, lived below her means, stayed focused, and somewhere along the way, she realized something. She didn't need David. She never had. But life had one more surprise waiting for Claire, one she never saw coming. During the divorce, back when everything was falling apart, David had wanted to pursue fertility treatments. They'd been trying to get pregnant for a year before the separation, and the doctor had suggested freezing embryos as a precaution. They'd gone through with it, created 6 viable embryos, signed paperwork about what would happen to them if they split up. Claire had been so overwhelmed at the time that she'd barely read the documents, just signed whatever the lawyer put in front of her. She assumed the embryos would be destroyed, but they weren't, due to a clerical error at the fertility clinic. The embryos had been stored under Claire's name only, and because David never followed up, never checked, never cared, they just sat there in a freezer in Detroit for 5 years. Claire didn't know about any of this, not until she got a call from the clinic in her 6th year in Atlanta. They were doing an audit, needed to confirm what she wanted done with the embryos. She almost said destroy them, almost hung up and forgot the whole thing. But something stopped her. She asked about the process, about whether it was even possible to use them now, after all this time. The doctor said yes. She thought about it for 3 weeks, thought about what it would mean, thought about whether she was ready. Then she made the appointment. 7 months later, she gave birth to triplets, 2 boys and a girl. Healthy, perfect, hers. She named them after her grandparents, the people who loved her unconditionally, the people who believed in her when no one else did. And for the first time in years, Claire felt complete. Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And if you're new here, click on the subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. Meanwhile, back in Michigan, David Cross was living the life he'd always wanted. He'd married Victoria 2 years after the divorce was finalized. The wedding was everything Claire's hadn't been. 300 guests, a ceremony at a historic church, a reception at the most exclusive country club in the state. His career had taken off. He was a partner at the firm now, managing millions of dollars in investments, rubbing elbows with people who mattered. Victoria was a perfect wife, at least on paper. She looked good at company events, knew how to make small talk with clients, came from the right family. But if David was being honest, which he rarely was, even with himself, the marriage was empty. They had separate bedrooms, separate lives. They barely spoke unless they were in public, performing the role of the successful power couple. Victoria spent her days at the spa and her evenings at charity galas. David spent his days at the office and his evenings wondering why success felt so hollow. He thought about Claire sometimes, late at night when he couldn't sleep, wondered where she'd ended up, whether she'd remarried, whether she ever thought about him. He told himself he'd made the right choice, that he was better off, that Claire would have held him back. But doubt has a way of creeping in when you're alone in the dark. His mother, Margaret, had been pushing for a vow renewal ceremony, said it would be good for David's image, good for the family name. Victoria agreed, thrilled at the chance to throw another lavish party. They set the date for June, sent out elaborate invitations, booked the same country club. Margaret had one more idea, a cruel one, though she'd never admit it. She suggested they send an invitation to Claire. Just as a gesture, she said, to show there were no hard feelings, to prove David had moved on. David hesitated, but only for a moment. He told himself it was closure, a way to finally put the past behind him. So he had his assistant track down Claire's address, had the invitation sent with a handwritten note. Hope you can make it. It would mean a lot. He was lying. What he really wanted was for her to see what she'd missed, to see him happy, successful, married to someone better. He wanted her to feel small again, but he had no idea who Claire had become, and he definitely had no idea about the triplets. The invitation arrived at Claire's home in Atlanta on a Tuesday afternoon. She was in her home office, reviewing contracts for a new commercial property development, when her assistant brought in the mail. The envelope was thick, expensive, cream-colored with gold lettering. She almost threw it away without opening it, but something made her look at the return address. Cross, Margaret and Henry, David's parents. Her hands went still. She opened the envelope slowly, carefully, like it might explode. Inside was an invitation to a vow renewal ceremony for David and Victoria Cross. Black tie, country club, reception to follow. And tucked inside, a handwritten note on embossed stationery. Claire, I know it's been a long time. I hope you're well. It would mean a lot if you could attend. Best, David. She read it 3 times. Then she started laughing. Not a happy laugh. A bitter, incredulous laugh that came from somewhere deep in her chest. He wanted her there, at his vow renewal, to watch him celebrate a marriage that had started before their divorce was even finalized, to remind her of what she'd lost. She should have torn it up, should have thrown it in the trash and moved on with her life. But Claire had learned something in the last 7 years. Sometimes the best response to cruelty isn't anger, it's success. She texted her assistant, I need you to RSVP yes to this event, and I need you to book a helicopter for June 15th. Her assistant, who'd been with her for 3 years and knew better than to ask questions, simply replied, on it. Claire looked at the invitation one more time. Then she picked up her phone and called her lawyer. She had one more thing to take care of before that wedding. The next 3 months were a whirlwind of preparation. Claire wasn't just going to show up at this wedding. She was going to make an entrance that no one would ever forget. She hired a stylist, had a custom dress made, something elegant and powerful, the kind of dress that made people stop and stare. She worked with her lawyer to finalize something she'd been putting off for years, the DNA test. She'd always known the triplets were biologically David's. They'd been created from his sperm and her eggs, frozen in that clinic all those years ago. But she'd never legally established paternity, never wanted his money, never wanted him in their lives. But now she needed proof. Official, legal, undeniable proof. The test came back exactly as she knew it would. David Cross was the biological father of her 3 children. Children he didn't know existed. Children he'd abandoned before they were even born, in a way. Her lawyer prepared the documents. Paternity test results. Medical records from the fertility clinic. A timeline that proved beyond doubt that these children were his. Claire didn't plan to demand anything. Didn't want child support or custody arrangements or anything else from David. She just wanted him to know. Wanted him to understand what he'd walked away from. Wanted him to see what his choice had cost him. The morning of June 15th, Claire woke up at 5 a.m., fed the triplets breakfast, buckled them into their car seats. They were 3 years old now, curious and bright and full of energy. They didn't understand where they were going or why Mommy was dressed so fancy. They just knew it was an adventure. The helicopter was waiting at a private airfield outside Atlanta. The pilot helped them aboard, secured the children in their special seats. Claire looked out the window as they lifted off the ground, and for the first time in 7 years, she allowed herself to think about David, not with anger anymore, not with sadness, with something else. Pity. The ceremony was scheduled for 2 p.m. David had been up since dawn, pacing the hotel suite, checking his phone every few minutes. Victoria was getting ready in another room, surrounded by her bridesmaids and a team of makeup artists. His mother had been calling all morning with last-minute instructions. The flowers, the seating chart, the photographer. David felt sick to his stomach, but he couldn't explain why. He told himself it was nerves, normal pre-ceremony jitters. But deep down, he knew it was something else. It was the invitation he'd sent to Claire. The stupid, petty, cruel invitation. He'd been checking the RSVP list obsessively for weeks. She'd said yes. She was actually coming. Part of him hoped she wouldn't show up. Part of him was terrified that she would. The ceremony began right on time. The country club lawn was immaculate. Rows of white chairs facing an arch covered in roses. 300 guests in their best clothes, whispering and smiling and taking photos. Victoria walked down the aisle in a dress that cost more than most people's cars. David stood at the altar, sweating through his tuxedo, trying to look happy. The officiant began the ceremony, talked about love and commitment and the journey of marriage. David barely heard any of it. He was scanning the crowd, looking for Claire, wondering if she was there, wondering what she looked like now, wondering if she was alone. Then he heard it, a sound that didn't belong, low and rhythmic and getting louder, thudding, mechanical. The guests started looking around, confused. The officiant paused mid-sentence. Victoria grabbed David's arm, her perfectly manicured nails digging into his sleeve. And then they all saw it, a helicopter, descending onto the far end of the lawn, about 100 yards from the ceremony. The rotor wash sent napkins flying off tables. Women grabbed their hats. Men shielded their eyes from the dust. The helicopter touched down. The engine powered down. The door opened, and Claire stepped out. David felt his heart stop. She looked nothing like the woman he'd left 7 years ago. That woman had been tired, worn down, small in a way that went beyond physical size. This woman was confident, powerful. She wore a navy blue dress that probably cost $5,000. Her hair was styled perfectly. She moved with the kind of grace that comes from knowing exactly who you are and what you're worth. But it wasn't just Claire who stepped out of the helicopter. Behind her came 3 children, identical faces, same dark curly hair, same bright eyes. Triplets. A nanny helped them down, holding their hands as they walked across the lawn toward the ceremony. The guests were completely silent now, all 300 of them watching this woman and these children approach. Victoria turned to David, her face pale, her voice shaking. "Who is that?" David couldn't speak, couldn't move. He felt like he was watching his life implode in slow motion. Margaret Cross stood up from her seat in the front row, her face a mask of fury and confusion. Claire walked all the way to the ceremony site, stopped about 10 feet from the altar. The triplets stood beside her, holding her hands, looking around at all the people with wide, curious eyes. The officiant cleared his throat nervously. I think we should," but Claire held up one hand. She wasn't there to interrupt, wasn't there to make a scene. She reached into her purse and pulled out a manila envelope, walked right up to David, handed it to him. Her voice was calm, quiet, but everyone heard it in the dead silence of that moment. "These are your children, David. They turned 3 in January. I thought you should know." David took the envelope with shaking hands, opened it. Inside were the paternity test results, the fertility clinic records, photos of the triplets as newborns, a letter from her lawyer explaining everything. Claire didn't wait for him to respond. She turned to the children, knelt down to their level. "Come on, babies. Let's go home." She stood up, looked at Victoria, who was crying now, mascara running down her face, looked at Margaret, whose expression had gone from fury to shock to something that might have been shame. Then she looked at David one last time. "Thank you for leaving me. I mean that. You freed me to become who I was always meant to be." And with that, she walked back to the helicopter, buckled the children in, climbed in beside them. The engine roared to life, and they lifted off, leaving 300 speechless guests and one destroyed groom standing on the lawn below. The ceremony did not continue. Victoria walked off the altar without a word, her bridesmaids hurrying after her. Half the guests left immediately. The other half stayed, whispering frantically, pulling out their phones to text everyone they knew about what they'd just witnessed. David stood there holding the envelope, his entire world crashing down around him. His mother tried to approach him. He walked away. His father tried to talk sense into him. He didn't respond. He just stood there on that perfect lawn in his perfect tuxedo at his perfect country club, realizing that he'd thrown away something real for something hollow. And now he had to live with that. The story made the local news. Not because Claire wanted it to, but because 300 people had witnessed it and social media exists. The headlines varied. Ex-wife crashes vow renewal with shocking revelation. Helicopter in trance reveals hidden children. But Claire didn't read any of them. She was too busy living her life, being a mother, running her business, building the kind of future she'd always dreamed of. David tried to reach out, called her, emailed her, had his lawyer contact her lawyer. She ignored all of it. The paternity test was just information. She didn't want anything from him. Not money, not involvement, not apologies. She'd given him the truth. What he did with it was his problem, not hers. 6 months later, she heard through mutual acquaintances that David and Victoria had divorced, that he'd left the firm, that he'd moved to another state, tried to outrun his reputation. She felt nothing when she heard it. No satisfaction, no vindication, just a quiet certainty that she'd done the right thing. Here's what most people don't understand about revenge. Real revenge isn't about hurting someone. It's about becoming so successful, so happy, so completely yourself that their opinion stops mattering. David Cross wanted to humiliate Claire, wanted her to see his success and feel small. But what he didn't realize was that she'd already moved past him. She'd already built a life that had nothing to do with him. The helicopter, the children, the designer dress, those weren't weapons. They were just the truth. A truth he'd been running from for 7 years. Claire didn't show up to that wedding to destroy him. She showed up to free herself, to close a chapter that had been left open for too long, to show her children, someday when they were old enough to understand, that you don't let people define you. You define yourself. And sometimes the best response to cruelty isn't more cruelty. It's living well. The triplets are 7 now. They're smart, funny, kind kids who have everything they need. A mother who loves them. A stable home. A future full of possibilities. They don't know their father. Maybe someday Claire will tell them the whole story. Maybe she won't. That's her decision to make, nobody else's. As for David, well, that's not Claire's story to tell anymore. He made his choices. Now he has to live with them. What do you think about this story? Was Claire right to show up at that wedding? Should she have told David about the children sooner? Or was he not entitled to know? How would you feel if you were in her position, standing there with proof of everything someone had thrown away? Let us know in the comments. We read every single one. And if this story moved you, if it made you think, if it reminded you that sometimes the best revenge is just living your best life, then hit that like button and share this with someone who needs to hear it. Because at the end of the day, we all have a choice. We can let our past define us, or we can use it as fuel to become something better. Claire chose the latter, and that made all the difference.